We're here today, along with the Toronto Police Accountability Coalition, John is here, together with community members that are representative of the literally dozens and dozens of community organizers who support the position we're taking here today. Our hope is that we are able to either change the minds or persuade some of the councillors, city council, who have already seemed to commit themselves to the police demand for an increase. In my experience, that isn't usually done until after the council sessions where the various matters and items are debated. But here, we already have, with no consultation, no input from the communities, no input from the public, we have councillors and the mayor who have already committed themselves to this increase. So we're hoping to change that. We have, I believe, 5 speakers in total, and I'm not going to say much. I'm just going to introduce them basically. The first is Jack Gemmell, who is a distinguished criminal defense counsel here in Toronto and has been a very, very long-standing member of the law union and a member of our policing committee. Jack?
Yes, good morning. I've been told I should spell my name. It's G-E-M-M-E-L-L, first name Jack. I'm just going to go briefly through some of the points made in the press release. This is all about a 3.9% increase in the police budget. The actual police budget is actually $1.4 billion, the actual amount that is coming towards city. That's before city council is the 1.2 net. This is in addition to, after the Toronto Police Services Board approved this budget, there was then announced that there had been a 5% retroactive increase awarded through an arbitrator. So that comes on top of the 3.9%. As well, the Toronto Police Association is in negotiations with the Toronto Police Services Board and City Council with respect to a collective agreement, which will of course impact the costs going forward even further. And this, of course, are hard costs from the city's point of view. These are collective agreement, and these are matters which the city will have to pay. And part of our concern is this will bake in a very large portion of the city council budget going towards policing services. On top of that, the Toronto Police Services Board has recently adopted the notion that a formula to justify further budget increases based on the concept of cop to pop. That is, that there should be some arbitrary fixed ratio of number of police officers to the population in the city of Toronto. Now, this is not a measure of police effectiveness. There's ample literature to that effect, and studies throughout North America to say that's not a measure of police effectiveness. What it is simply a means to justify further increases in the future. And of course, the problem is this will hamper the city's ability to deal with some of the very serious underlying social problems which lie at the root of crime and disorder in this city. And these include issues such as poverty, lack of housing, lack of opportunity for our young men and women, and of course the problem of social alienation and isolation, which is a problem in this city. As the money goes more towards policing, it will inevitably mean less of the pie will go towards these services. And this will become acute in the years coming because the city will not be able to simply increase the taxes as it has, once at a certain point the homeowners and ratepayers will balk at that. The budget also raises a transparency issue. The public and city council need to really know where the money is going. And one of the problems in this budget is the Toronto Police Services Board has a $92 million black hole but we don't really know where the money is going. This is they marked this area confidential, and it covers a wide range of what we regard as critical police services, such as intelligence, guns and gangs, financial crimes. We have no idea how that $92 million is allocated amongst these units, nor do we know how much they represent increases or decreases in the previous year. And we really call on the City Council has the power to say we need to know, we have to have this breakdown, but they haven't received it. There's also a governance issue here. The Law Union of Ontario has been a regular attendant at the Toronto Police Services Board. And one of the points we've been trying to make is to try and get the Toronto Police Services Board to implement its police reform motion, which was created in the wake of the George Floyd murder in 2020. In August of 2020, the board adopted a relatively modest police reform package, but it is not being implemented. And an important part of that related to budget transparency. The City Council passed a motion in 2020 saying they wanted the budget broken down by program, service, and function. The 2021 Toronto Police Services Board adopted a budget transparency policy which said we need this broken down by program, service, and function. This has not happened. We've repeatedly asked them to do it, and we, aside from the occasional excuse, it is clear it's not going to happen. And this raises serious issues as to who's in charge. This raises governance issues. The governance of the police lies essentially in the hands of the Toronto Police Services Board. And this is something they have fallen down on. We see it very clearly in the budget figures that have been provided. Just to deal with some very particular issues, one of the budget issues which is surfaced is the problem with premium pay. Premium pay is essentially overtime, callbacks, time in lieu, paid to police officers for essentially working overtime. And what has happened since 2022, essentially the Toronto Police Services Board appears to have lost control over that. And you get a very, very substantial increase this year in premium pay. And this is what's happened as well with respect to that is when you look at the Sunshine List, most recent figures in 2023 provided by the Ontario government, we see that some officers apparently have understood how to play the game. And we have officers who are making north of $300,000. And these aren't officers who are members of the homicide squad working tireless hours to try and solve a difficult case. It's hard to say who they are. All they are is their names keep reappearing. One of the arguments made by the Toronto Police Association is that their officers somehow are underpaid relative to other members in this province. We disagree with that, but looking at that Sunshine List, it's clear that some are clearly overpaid. And you really wonder what kind of money and service you're getting for someone who manages to bill $387,000. Now, I finally want to finish with one comment with respect to community policing. My understanding is that Mayor Chow is a big promoter of community policing. So are we, when it's done correctly. The classic definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting that you're going to get a different result. We've had long-term endemic problems of gun violence in some of our communities, yet the police continue to adopt a model of enforcement and not engaging with the communities who are the real victims of this. And I'm thinking specifically about the Jane Finch area and the recent cases, for example, of a young man taking out his garbage who gets shot by someone For no apparent reason, another man standing at a bus stop shot down. The way you deal with this is with partnerships with the underlying communities, real partnerships towards problem solving to try and deal with the underlying issues, and then that way begin to identify how to actually solve it. We need solutions, not policing. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Sid Jackson, who is a founding member and continuing member of Voices, and then the numerical for Unhoused Liberation. And Sid is going to give you some background about her organization and her view of the police request, demand, however you want to put it, for more money. Sid?
Hello, my name is Sid Jackson, and I'm a founding member of Voices for Unhoused Liberation, and we do frontline work at the Delta Hotel Shelter in North Scarborough, as well as we do outreach in various encampments. So basically, we're on the front lines of the situation of unhoused folks in the city of Toronto, and in supporting people in community, we get a very insider view to a lot of the issues that people are facing. So as poor and unhoused people, we vehemently oppose all increases to the police budget. Despite the fact that we've been getting up here as members of civil society for decades, telling the city that policing is a costly and harmful approach to the situation of poor, unhoused communities, the city continues over and over again to inflate the police budget. The criminalization of poverty is a very serious issue faced by our community that is long recognized by multiple agencies across the city and groups who are working on the front lines as a serious problem impacting unhoused poor community. With the province giving more powers to municipalities to arrest and fine people for public drug consumption in the wake of the safe consumption site closures, and for camping on public property, we can expect police attacks on our communities to get even worse. And it really must be understood that poor and unhoused people are disproportionately Black, transgendered, queer. They are migrants and refugees. Women, and especially people who are disabled and or Indigenous, are, those are two of the leading factors in a person becoming unhoused. So this means that the police in the city are actively involved in the structural oppression of minority groups who lack substantial political voice in civic politics, including in the budget. Poor unhoused folks are not just criminalized by the daily work of policing, but they're further targets for sexual and physical assault by police, harassment, intimidation, and murder. We just saw this case the other day of somebody who was in a mental health crisis, and the police responded to the call, and she was so afraid of the police because of the history of policing in the poor and unhoused community that she tried to scale her balcony and fell to her death. The Toronto Police Service has been exposed as corrupt and unaccountable, again by civil society organizations, and impacted communities have been calling for them to be checked. But right now, they are just too powerful, and the city just continues to bend to their power. So over-policing exacerbates trauma and other kinds of mental health distress, causes forced displacement, economic stress through loss of work and unpayable fines, loss of community through parole, through parole restrictions, separation from important supports in community. It also fuels stigmatization and discrimination by the general public. Over-policing prevents poor and unhoused people from gaining safety and stability and accessing supports. Also, over-policing the poor costs the city a huge amount of money. After decades of pressure from the community, last year the city finally declared homelessness a state of emergency, but the city is far from acting like it. Inaction by the city is causing a consistent rise in homelessness and the decline in conditions in which unhoused people exist. Facing the egregious actions by the province to shut down SCS and clear encampments, the city needs to engage with harm reduction communities to strategize how to keep good work of the SCSs going. Money should be put there. Right now, community members are supporting people in encampments while the city continues to harass them. The city needs to immediately provide for the living conditions of people living outdoors by consulting with the unhoused community as to the short-term and long-term solutions to homelessness. Short-term solutions can be tiny homes towards the long-term solution of building enough safe, universally accessible RGI housing. Many unhoused folks don't want to have anything to do with the unsafe and corrupt Toronto shelter system. The city needs to invest in decarceralizing the shelter system and bringing it in line with Toronto shelter standards. As we face climate change that brings unpredictable and extreme weather, the warming and respite centers should be open year-round and should be improved in the kind of environment that is offered. In short, the city must shore up all agencies that support poor and unhoused people during a cost of living and housing crisis, which is created by the city itself through decades of egregious neglect. Instead of using the police to further harm to poor and unhoused community, the city needs to stop its war on the poor and take action. We are calling for absolutely no increase to the public budget. I also have another community member named Sanguinard, who is a harm reduction worker, and I'm going to read her statement. She's also a member of Voices. Hey everyone, we're here today to talk about something that really bothers me, the police budget. They're asking for a huge chunk of our tax money, a whopping $46.2 million more this year. Meanwhile, people are living on the streets. It doesn't make sense. Instead of celebrating cops for saving someone from an overdose, I read something on LinkedIn where a cop bragged about saving his partner's life after they touched fentanyl. Someone with experience like myself knows this is misinformation. You can't overdose from simply touching fentanyl. This highlights a critical lack of understanding within the police force regarding substance use. With jobs disappearing for people working in harm reduction and supporting marginalized communities, things are only going to get worse. More people will be arrested for simply having personal use substances, clogging up our jails and overwhelming hospitals. Without harm reduction workers and the support of people who understand what it's like to struggle, more people are going to die because they don't have access to the resources or the supports they need to stay safe. And let's not forget the constant trauma of encampment clearances. They tear people away from their homes, their communities, the places where they feel safe, where they can access resources, and where they can have a sense of belonging. When the government relocates people, they often end up isolated and alone, increasing their vulnerability and the risk of overdose. This is only going to get worse for the cops. They're going to be getting more and more calls, dealing with situations they're not trained for. We need to remember that people trust us, people with lived experience, people who do harm reduction work. They don't trust the police. I've seen it firsthand, the fear, the distrust, the way people shut down when the police show up. I have even witnessed cops intimidate people by driving up to doorways, revving their engines, and backing up repeatedly. It's a display of power, a deliberate attempt to instill fear. We need to demand change. Our money should go to funding harm reduction programs, supporting community-based solutions, and investing in the expertise of people with lived experience. Let's make our voices heard. Thank you. And I'd like to introduce... Oh, you want to? Okay.
Next speaker is Dred Green, who's an anti-suffering activist with actual lived experience in the shelter system and in encampments. He's a beloved community organizer, not only with respect to Voices for Unhoused Liberation, but generally among communities who obviously need some of the money that's going to go to the police if you're actually going to fight crime in this city. Dred?
TREDDZ. Good morning. I'm guessing everyone can hear me clearly. Okay, so we're talking about the money spent. Where can it go? We can start with the shelter system. So I've been in it back and forth throughout life for a while. And one of the recent challenges I keep seeing where shelters or shelter hotels are located, they keep complaining about crime in the area. But what people don't understand about the shelter system, it is pretty much an outdoor jail. You stay there and you're getting little to no resource in the means of getting out and forward if you don't fall in the lines of certain rules. So one of the challenges could be trying to get somebody to investigate and make sure that that stays solid in every shelter, not one or two shelters, to make sure it's a rotating door and not a camp for people so they get the chance to get the chance at progress and to step out and do for themselves. So every day they're staying there, they're getting meals. Some of them aren't the greatest, but in the youth shelters, I don't know if it's still a thing, but they would get a thing called personal needs allowance. So even at $3-5 a day, whatever it be, you at least have bus fare, the ability to go somewhere where you can get your stuff done, for example. Adults aren't getting this, so they're stuck in the neighborhoods they're introduced to. They're forced to adapt. They meet a friend that knows how to function in that neighborhood. It's not always the greatest relationship. Yet the same thing we say being in the shelter system does when you're in there for a while. It becomes toxic, so now you're collecting dirty money by doing whatever dirty deeds, right? Instead of getting yourself up and out, back to seeing your children, seeing your mother, right? The family love, the things you know, right? Sustaining yourself, getting away from the toxic people, whether it be a lover, an ill friend, like things like this, right? It's making sure that workers are going around, and if you have them all in separate rooms, you have the ability to go door to door, leave a note for them. Hi, come see me. We have 10 ways to contact you from intake. Let's make sure we're trying to contact you if we're not giving you the finances to do so, for example. So these are where some of the funds could go in the means of shelter, better food, right, along the grade of, I guess, there's quite a few different things. There's TCHC housing. I may go a little longer than, I mean, love for that. There's the challenges of investigating the accountability of how police act in those closed, low-budget environments, right? There's a lot of ill treatment, the managements, the maintenance. There's a lot of better places where the monies could go that the people need. Revamping things like Woodbine Mall that's been just a big empty space, turning that into some brand of shelter, housing-esque, program-related, life progressive thing becomes community-esque. So the shelter's upstairs, the community stuff's downstairs, you can live across the street, work with it. There's many other places that are more beneficial than spending it on more reinforcement to rules that you're letting things go wild and free to. And that is no fault of the people, but the people are paying for it with their time, their monies. They're working 60-hour weeks, not enough time to spend with their children, and can't, do what they need to, right? In the means of inputting goodness into the family, whatever ways it can. There's a lot of better places it can go, and the people that are outside are they need more than just a tent. They need things to help them get their lives back together, and that is where we want to see the money spent. Better housing, investigating issues within housing like maintenance, because those are realistic challenges, because now those become health things that people have to live and deal with within that community, right? That are just additions instead of just, like I said, a rotating door helping people get out and around, right? So thanks for the time. I love you all.
One love.
Our next speaker is Brad Evoy. Brad is with the Disability Justice Network Ontario. It aims to build a just and accessible Ontario, and as many of you are probably aware, the CBC ran a 3 or 4 minute segment on its news last week showing how disabled people are unable to do things as simply cross the street because they can't get up the curb on the other side. Brad's organization aims to build a just and accessible Ontario wherein people with disabilities have both the personal and the political capacity to thrive a better and a good life here in Toronto. Brad?
Hello, folks. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. So my name is Brad Evoy. That's BRAD-EVOY. I'm the Executive Director with Disability Justice Network of Ontario. I'm a member of the Hullabaloo Mi'kmaq Nation, and I'm really happy to be speaking to all of you here today on this critical and important topic. I think, when we are looking at things like the increases to the police budget here in Toronto, I want to compare that number to the increases that some other social services are getting across the city.
Good point.
So if we look at this as $46 million in increase, over $1 billion budget for TPS, and compare that to $15 million for TTC service expansion, $4.9 million for the Toronto Public Library, $4.6 million for the Toronto Shelter and Support Services, and only $3.6 million in increase for the Housing Secretariat that funds things like the rent bank, as well as providing funding towards Toronto community housing, seniors housing, operating subsidies, and all that sort of stuff. I think we can see where the priority in this city is. And the priority in this city, if we look at a budget as a set of political priorities, the priorities is advancing policing, criminalization, and violence on our communities, and not towards the things that actually allow us to be and be part of community, whether it's in our housing spaces, which, as everyone here has already well stated, is an incredible crisis in this city and a state of fundamental social underinvestment. The TTC, which fundamentally is moving people away from full service when it comes to paratransit and wheel-trans towards a family of service model that benefits, like cutting corners on the TTC, as TTC riders and others have stated in the past. And, when we look at these kinds of expenses, I have to ask, where is the money for building actually accessible housing in this city? In particular, since the city has built new accessibility standards for public housing that have just been implemented earlier this year. Where is the money for that? Where is the money for ensuring that city services are meeting the completely low metrics, the 20-year-old metrics of the failed the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act? And fundamentally, where is the money for reinvesting into our social programs and structures? Ultimately, disabled folks in this city and in cities across the province are asking these questions. Fundamentally, every city budget in this province is experiencing similar increases for policing. At a time when the province is expanding policing powers through new legislation and explicitly targeting disabled folks. And I'm going to say that again. The new legislation does target explicitly disabled folks. And so every increase to policing in this city is complicit in that political direction. Because what I want folks to really understand here is that when we're talking about, for example, unhoused communities, these are disabled communities. As the Canadian Human Rights Commission and officer of the Federal Housing Advocate has mentioned, people with disabilities are more likely to experience homelessness because of violence or abuse. And that includes 63% of women with disabilities. Overall, Folks with disabilities are more likely to miss mortgage and rent payments because of financial issues than other folks. And ultimately, we've been more likely to be forced to move due to the long shadow of things since the COVID-19 pandemic, where during that period, that was less likely to happen. An aberration for 30 years of social murder across this province, but in particular in this city. You know, financial hardship
Right here.
and the difficulty to have cost of living is something that everyone in this city is familiar with. Everyone feels that here. But if we're talking about constant reinvestment into policing, that goes nowhere and doesn't improve the safety and lived experience of people on the ground here in this city, what are we doing here? What is the direction that we want to build for all Torontonians, but more broadly for all folks across Ontario? Because what's happening here is a microcosm of what's happening across the province, where there has been 30 years of underinvestment and social murder. The austerity agenda that this represents the continuation of by this budget and by the pressures from the fake union, the Toronto Police Association, represents, ultimately undercuts the ability of the rest of us to have real safety and security in our lives. That comes from strong social services. And ultimately, what we've seen here and around the province is a continuation of giving more and more to policing, while we know and have heard from folks who've already spoken and, across the board, that there are real solutions here. The city could be investing more in supporting, broader housing initiatives that have less barriers. It could be focusing on increasing even more money to the TTC, or working to surpass the weak metrics of the AODA and actually enforcing that through building inspections and other sorts of things. But it's not doing that. Instead, it's bowing to pressure from police. And simply, that isn't acceptable here in Toronto, and it's not acceptable around the province where it's happening as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Last speaker is John Sewell. I'm sure all of you know, former mayor of this great city, lawyer, and the founder and continuing leader in the Toronto Police Accountability Coalition, generally known as TPAC. John?
My name's John Sewell. I'm the coordinator of the Toronto Police Accountability Coalition. The budget that the mayor has released calls for an increase in policing of $46 million, as we've heard. And what that doesn't include are salary increases for 2024 and 2025. The 2024 has already been decided. It'll be about an extra $50 million. And assuming that in fact 2025 is about the same, it'll probably be another $50 million. So in fact, the actual amount of money that the police would get would be more like $150 million rather than $46 million. That other money for the settlements is set up in a separate fund in the budget that the mayor released of $300 million. Our suggestion is that rather than spending all of that money on policing, we should be spending a lot of that money to deal with the unhoused. To deal with one unhoused person costs about $4,000 a month. That would include the cost of an apartment and supportive services and food and so forth. So that's about $50,000 a year per person. It's a lot of money, but that's the cost of solving social problems. If in fact they took $80 million of that money, rather than giving it to police, they could house about 1,500 people in this year, right away. We know that in Toronto there's over 5,000 people who are unhoused. We should be actually addressing that with that kind of money. And it seems to us that's a reasonable thing to do. It means that the police don't get anywhere like all the money they need. They have to start saving money. As our organization have said, if you got rid of the rule that basically requires 2 officers in a car after dark, you could save $30 to $40 million a year. That's the kind of savings that the police should start looking at. They've never been asked to do that. They've never done that. Now's the chance to do it. We should be taking that money, instead of giving it to the police, we should take something like that $75 million and give it to housing the unhoused. As I say, about 1,500 people. So that's our proposal, and we're hoping that City Council would actually agree to that kind of request. Deal with the big issue in Toronto, which is the unhoused. Thank you very much.
John, while you're still there, can I just ask you a quick question? Last year we saw so many, just the police union and this real concerted effort against the amount of money that the budget was offering.
Right.
Do you think the mayor and her allies are gun shy this year to go up against them again?
Well, it looks like they are. When the mayor had the press conference, she had a lot of police officers behind her. There's no question that the police association can put on enormous pressure on Toronto City Council. We've seen that in many, many years. They can also intimidate members of councils, as they've done. But in fact, I think what we need is our city councillors to stand up and say, we've got priorities in this city. And one of our priorities is to house the unhoused. And if in fact it means the police have to start saving money, they should start saving money. That's the kind of choice that I think this council should be making, and I hope they will make it.
John, you've been in your position for a long time, the accountability, you've also been the mayor of the
I have.
city. When you compare what happened last year, where there was a big kind of fight, very public, to this year, just nothing kind of passing it through, how unusual is that from your perspective?
Well, unfortunately, too often, the mayor caves in to what the police are doing. I mean, certainly John Tory did that for a long time. Rob Ford did that for him. And it's really unfortunate. I mean, budgets are about choices. And I want City Council to start debating that choice. And I realize it's going to be difficult because the police put on a lot of pressure. But I mean, the evidence, and Howard referred to it, the evidence is really clear from almost every single study we've seen in North America. Giving police more money doesn't resolve in less crime. Toronto is one of the cities in Canada that has the lowest rate of crime, except for Quebec City. So we don't have any problems there. We do have a problem with disorder. It's because we've got all these people who are unhoused, and we've got to start housing them. And we've got that opportunity. The money is sitting there. City Council should make the choice that that's what they want to do.
John, the mayor says that she is on board with the police request for more funding this year because they've presented a multi-year hiring plan, and she says that the money that she's allocating will go to reduce response times. What's your response to that?
Well, first of all, she's only said she's in support of the $48 million. As I've indicated, you add in the salary increases, it's going to be about $150 million. The second thing is, our organization doesn't buy the idea that more police officers are going to reduce response times. Response times in Toronto are mostly caused by extraordinary traffic situations. I mean, anybody who drives around Toronto knows the problem. You try to go down this road, oh, it's closed for construction and so forth. So, I mean, that's the problem with response times. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming. Our ask of the media, and you do cover crime, you cover policing, and you cover some of the social ills you've heard about today. My experience is the media never integrates all three of those things and offers out a question about where is the best place to put money to make Toronto a safer city. Adding more money to their budget and more police officers, I can guarantee you that is not going to reduce the so-called crime rate. But there is one thing I can guarantee you of. If you put money into community policing, real community policing, and addressing all of the issues that persons in marginalized communities face, I guarantee you if you go for the roots of crime, you will lower crime. And that's where our money should be going. But thanks again very much for taking the time to come. We'll hang around.
I have one quick question. So I know there's the unhoused community, but then there is the marginalized, like TCHCS community. And there are challenges in that environment as well, including function, trying to communicate with management. Recently, at the building I live at, somebody was murdered. And the day after that, we suddenly had a community meeting. 2 new programs were inserted without resident input. And residents were upset at that at first. And it's the same programs that are already in the shelter system that aren't doing anything constructive. So now, how do we get to speak towards the betterment of the overall poor environment, including the unhoused and the housed with the challenged state, including being heard through the management, getting things investigated properly?
In my
committees and
view,
such.
unquestionably, the way you reduce crime and the way you address the concerns that you have is to invest your money in what are the real root causes of crime. The shootings that we hear about, I'm sure you're all aware, many of the suspects, so-called suspects, are teenagers. And I can tell you, if I grew up in a project, in one of those marginalized communities, knowing my Irish personality, I would be a member of a gang. Because it's the only way I would get any respect. It's the only way I wouldn't get beaten up on a regular basis. And it's the only way I would be able to have a girlfriend. So if you create opportunity for young people, I guarantee you will reduce crime. I don't know if that answers your...
So now, in the means of solution towards challenges like that, even redirecting programs or things such as job fairs and putting them in those communities instead of putting them in the downtown core, where it's a challenge for people that really need the jobs to get a hold of them, to begin to secure so they can even give back and help patch the unhoused situation, right? They can have a friend sleep on their couch because food doesn't cost $1 million at the grocery store anymore, right? So, like, we need things that get towards these solutions. So, whom do we get to present all of this to as to where the money can be spent towards the marginalized communities, and not just back in the police pocket, not a 1.1 billion a year and it keeps increasing, turns into 1.5 billion a year, and then it's like, well, how no housing project even gets $1 million of that.
Well,
Okay.
the way to do it, and you'll need the media's assistance, because this chief of police, the police association, and sadly some media outlets, particularly CTV, have purposely created a feeling of paranoia throughout Toronto that our children are in danger, our homes are in danger, crime is out of control. You've got the only one that can stop this 150 million from simply adding to that is to get to the mayor, get to the councillors, and keep coming as you did today, and we really appreciate it. Keep coming, because this fight, as Jack mentioned, is not over. We now have the next contract negotiations, and they're going to for sure want more money. There's no question about that. So we have to keep this up, and we can win in the end.
And then I just have just one more, because I don't want to. I know time's limited for everyone. How do we go about when and if these things do get produced, including some unhoused or some experienced people at these tables to have input? And this includes if they're going to tear down a strip mall and turn it into apartments. Like, is it going to be affordable housing for just people who can afford condos, or is it going to turn into $200 units that some of the people outside this mall was not being used, we turned it into something where we just house 50 people. We start doing that with a few flats or whatever the solution be. But how do we get people on the developer input, where the community resource input goes, like as a part of where the funding goes if these groups get.
I think the
constructed.
only place to attack is city council. They're the ones that could control all of those things. And you have to take what we used to call back in the anti-Vietnam War days, direct action. It can't be just an email or a letter. You've got to get your colleagues and supporters down to this building where they're meeting right now on this budget, and just incessantly don't stop just getting on their case about how wrong they are about reducing crime and about how wrong they are as to where this money should be going. Because every study will tell you that if you want to lower crime rates, then what you've got to do is you've got to go after the causes of crime. You can't just keep enforcement after the fact when crimes are committed. I don't know if that answers the question.
It's some, but it's
I have a question, and this would be open to any of the members to answer. But from what I'm hearing, it sounds like the issue is that there's a lack of political will in order to move solutions that would be long-term and sustainable, as opposed to merely through enforcement. And so I wonder if there's a lot of probably citizens in Toronto who would want the policing because to them they see it as the immediate solution to syringes in parks or tents in public spaces, things that make them feel uncomfortable when they see people who are not lucid or not well. And so the mayor responds to that because it's the easiest thing. And I know that your criticism is of the policing institution, but my question to you would be, do you think that it is a fundamental disrespect to police officers to ask them to solve poverty, addiction, and mental health with powers of arrest and fining? They simply don't have the tools to solve it. So do you all see that as a fundamental disrespect to ask officers to even try to perform that task?
It may well be disrespect, but the problem, as I've seen it over the years, and I was a prosecutor for a long time, is that no matter how much money and time you put into police training, they will never be as good as persons trained in psychology, other social skills, who are able to diffuse situations. The case that was mentioned by Sid with this young woman trying to get away from the police, obviously in some sort of a personal trauma situation. The police can't prevent that. They don't have the ability. You could train them 1,000 hours. They will never have the ability. They have the abilities in many other areas. Don't get me wrong. It's a tough job and they do a lot of things well. But in terms of diffusing situations where people, whether it's a teenager who feels he has no opportunity of enjoying the things that my children and your children enjoy, that's where you've got to have people who know what they're doing in those areas and can help. Community policing, just to give you a quick example, is if you set it up right, you have a situation where a mother who notices her son has had some guys over the house the last couple of days who seem to be talking about dealing in drugs. Your son is otherwise a good student, good athlete, good. She has to have someone to go to in the community to say, I don't want my son charged, but I'd like to know if you can help me with this situation. Take a look at what's being done in Boston. It's not perfect, but it so far seems to be working in terms of creating community policing where you involve the community at every stage of what you're going to call community policing. I will say one or two.
Yeah. I really don't think that the police feel insulted by being put on the front line of poverty because they continually insert themselves there. It's a big issue in the city where, you know, they create these programs, these test pilot programs to walk the streets with like a city nurse, a social worker, and a police officer. And this is like basically the police inserting themselves into these spaces where the community has loudly and clearly said they don't want the police there. The issue is that the community knows what they need and what they want from the city in order to increase stability in their communities and safety. And the city refuses to talk and engage with civil society organizations like SHJN and Toronto Union for the Homeless and Underhoused. It's the Shelter Housing Justice Network. They do amazing reports every year. They're made up of people who work on the front lines, who are social workers and frontline medical street nurses and whatnot. And these are the people who actually engage with people, know what the issues are, and get feedback from the community about what they actually need. And they're continually going to the city and offering all of this, it's free labor done that we do, on the front lines, trying to educate the city. And they take the ideas and they weaponize them. So they take language, like for instance, they do research on anti-Black racism in the shelter system, and then that gets weaponized against shelter residents. They're talking about taking up transformative justice now because they just did a big report with CAMH about violence in the shelter system, where they never talked about the violence that unhoused people in the shelter system experience at the hands of shelter staff, security, and police. Was not even mentioned in that report. And they say, oh, well, we recommend transformative justice, but the city has no idea what that means. I mean, it'd be fantastic if they took that seriously, but will they? I don't believe it, because the Toronto Shelter Standards is actually a reasonable document, but none of the shelters live up to that standard. It's the opposite. They are not supporting people, they are actually aggravating harms to people and making the unhoused situation worse by continually to traumatize unhoused people through neglect. And the police are a big part of that. They insert themselves into it, and the community don't want that. So I really don't think that it's an insult to police. I think it's more an insult to people who actually work in shelters, who are underpaid. People are funneled into that with lack of training. The people who run the shelter system are anti-union. They create hostile and toxic work environments. And those are the people, I think, who are really insulted by this lack of attention by the city to actually create safe shelter spaces in which the workers are actually respected, and so that they can actually do a good job in supporting people in communities. I just want to say quickly that I read a statement by a person named Sam Guinard. I wanted to spell that for you, Guignard. And Sam is a person with lived experience who is a longtime advocate for unhoused and is a harm reduction worker. And she's also a member of Voices for Unhoused Liberation. So I just wanted to put that on. Thank you.
Just quickly to add from my perspective, I think when we think about folks who are insulted by, things that are happening here, I think we need to think about the members of our community and their families, racialized disabled folks, Black disabled folks, Indigenous disabled folks, Afro-Indigenous disabled folks, who in moments of crisis are injured, harmed, or killed by police. There are so many folks. We could go through a ginormous list of folks in this community, in Toronto, who have been killed or harmed through police-involved actions. And ultimately, it's those folks who have suffered the most from the continued increases of the Toronto Police Services budget. And ultimately, police are not just the wrong tool. They shouldn't be involved in some of these areas fundamentally for the sake of the families and for the sake of the memory of people who suffered because of them. And I think that when we look at this, and look at the way that Toronto has operated now for 30 years, right? This is not a current moment problem, but is part of a longer continuity, and it's a system where we choose to focus on crime, on punishment, on violence towards various communities in this city, rather than actually building the building blocks that we need to thrive as a city and to thrive as people within it. And when it comes to our perspective as an abolitionist organization, as an organization focused on disabled folks across the province, a lot of the bulk of that falls on our community and on our communities across various intersections. So I think, like, for us, when we think about that kind of insult, again, I think about the families of people who've lost family members. I think about people who have been injured due to police-involved action.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks again for coming, we really appreciate it.
Do you guys by chance have, I know John mentioned a number, which is like $4,000 a month in order to house and care for somebody who is unhoused.
Right.
Is there a comparable number for if you did nothing? What is the cost of somebody who engages with police, goes to the hospital, is put into a jail system? What is the cost? Do you have a comparative cost of if you
that?
just kept things the same way?
We don't, but that's actually a good idea.
There is research done in community about that. I don't know. The Homeless Hub put out an infographic about like how much a hospital bed costs, how much an ER visit costs, how much a prison bed costs, and versus how much it costs to house somebody. Because if you house them, you save money in all these other areas. So I don't know. I mean, I can look up the infographic for you if you want, and you can look at that. Yes.
If we can find it.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do you have a contact or a card?
I'm a freelancer with CBC, so I'm not.
CBC. CBC. I got you right here, bro.
Hello.
Hello, eh? I'm with the. Nah, me not stop me do it. I go on next. I go on. Yeah, me I go send it for sure. But me I go on next some. Man, 1 hour. 1 hour is that 1 hour.
Also, I
Individual
think
address.
You were great. How do you pronounce it? Thank you.
Some of the challenges we always hear about, but people want to know the meaning.
CBC.
They're outside, so they don't get to eat.
Right?
May not be able to help at the time.
You guys have cards?
We always need criminal.
Good?
Waiting for list of criminal lawyers that's supposed to be
And especially for old people. Like it was for young.
What's going on?
How much?
I came here Monday, you weren't here.
Yeah.
You heard?
No.
I want you to deliver the message to Mayor Chow. I need to talk to her.
Okay, what is it? I'm running to a meeting. What is it?
Personal, honestly, Reginald Cuff. Just pass the message to her, please.
Yeah.
Please, please, tell her to call me. Tell her to call me, okay?
service. My dear President,